Everybody, good evening and welcome to this evening's webinar. I'm your host, Dr. Jed Applerouth, and I'm excited to talk about two topics that are near and dear to my heart, helping people self-regulate their feelings, their emotions, their anxiety levels, learning how to be calmer in the face of challenges and stresses, and then also motivation, helping students achieve the most they can achieve and towards their goals, towards their outcomes, things that I've helped students with for over 20 years. And tonight we're going to be talking about these two topics. We'll have some Q&A at the end. One note in terms of my style of presenting, I go through a lot of slides, but I always share the deck afterwards. And so don't worry about taking on every single word from the deck. They'll be coming your way. We also are going to have a recording that we'll share with you. So if you want to watch a part again or share it with a spouse or a student or a friend, that'll be coming your way as well. All right, so I see most people are in the room. Let's go ahead and do a quick poll. It'll take you all of 30 seconds. Are you a student, a parent, an educator? Next, if you have a student, just where are they in the process? A junior, a freshman, a senior, in the military, I'm sorry, in middle school or elementary school? Number 3 is, do you need any help at all with any academic stuff or test prep or coaching? And then finally, would you want someone to reach out? And that's it, then you close it and we are done. So that's the poll. And let's begin. So anxiety, that is a big topic. There's a lot of requests to discuss anxiety because honestly, there are a lot of stressors. There are a lot of things that are going on that are causing anxiety. I mean, gosh, even this weekend, what happened in Highland Park, and I have a little two-year-old kid, and my wife and I are talking about that. And are we safe when we go to places? That's a cause of anxiety. Talking about school, talking about outcomes, talking about the economy. There are things that cause stress, and children today experience more stress and more anxiety than previous generations of students. And anxiety is manifesting; it's showing up more. Anxiety and depression both. So the mental health, the epidemic's a big word, but we're definitely dealing with more of that in a much broader way. The pandemic have just accelerated that, but it's been a phenomenon that's been growing even before the pandemic. More anxiety, more into depression, even more self-harm among kids that we're seeing. So handling anxiety is a big thing. I have friends who are clinical psychiatrists, psychologists, and their practices are full with kids who need help in these areas. So part of it is we have more stressors, and at the same time, we're doing fewer things that we know are proven to mitigate and alleviate stress in terms of time with friends and getting good night's sleep and hanging out with our pets, things of that nature. We'll talk about these different things. And one for sure, absolute cause of stress for kids is this culture of performance, this need to project a self and a self-image where you have it together. And you're polished, and we talk about this need to perform a self versus having an authentic self, which with all the wrinkles and all the grime and the underbelly, other things, things are great, but trying to maintain that veneer is in itself stressful, and needing people to validate you and like and thumbs up and how's my outfit, how many that's by its nature stressful. So that's going on. One book I always reference that I really enjoyed. Dr. Twenge was on the circuit about now 3 or 4 years ago, but she was looking at the study that they conduct for now it's 47 years at the University of Michigan, where they're looking at mental health for kids, and they've been looking at this over for almost 5 decades. And one of the things they found is that since the advent of the cell phone, we have less sleep, and that's something which is definitely tied to mental health. Kids are not getting their 7 hours at the same level. We have more kids who are sleep deprived than when I was in high school. And we know that kids who spend more than 3 hours a day on their phones are more likely to get less than their needed 7 hours sleep. And some kids need 8 hours. Everyone's different. My wife needs 8.5 sometimes. And as we know that when you don't get your sleep you need, your ability to regulate your emotions, your feelings, your anxiety levels decreases. Sleep is our great reset. It keeps us healthy now and in decades later in terms of inflammation in the brain and everything else. Sleep is so important. Teens are spending about 6 hours a day on looking at their devices. High school seniors, not teens in general. So this is the seniors. This is a lot of time to texting, being on the net, surfing, gaming, chatting with each other on video and Instagram and things. So there's a lot of time on the phones, which is a big deal. And we know that more than 5 hours plugged in, which is about average for high school seniors, a greater chance of sleep deficits, greater chance of suicidal ideation and even attempts, all these things, and an increase in being unhappy compared to those who use their devices at a much lower level. And yes, and there was something, teens do need more sleep. So 7 hours may be enough for a 35-year-old, but some teens need 8.5, 9 hours of sleep. Some even 10, depending on your body and where you are. So we know that the things that tend to increase happiness and lower anxiety levels are reading a book is better than surfing and scrolling, being in person with a friend, being on a team, and going to any kind of group activity or group service, getting your sleep, doing activities like sports, being physical. These things make us happier. And it seems in the past 30 years, these things have all decreased. It's interesting looking at this generation of students, how they're doing less hanging out in person and they're more hanging out on their phones. Even kids are going on dates at a lower frequency. They're having girlfriends and boyfriends. They're going to parties less than we used to. All these things where they're interacting, having to see each other and see faces. Now they're on screens more in every single way, which is one of the causes, I do believe, in what's happening with mental health, among other things. So in terms of this comparison culture, which is real, trying to get people to look at your TikTok thing with your dance or looking at your Instagram, getting likes, this need for affirmation from others is by itself destabilizing and anxiety inducing. Needing someone to affirm. There's a whole thing of, it used to be when you got getting your thoughts out, you'd write into a journal that nobody would see, that you wouldn't share. I kept the journal, and I still do actually. I was writing it yesterday. And many of you do too, where it's not for performance. I'm not performing a self, I'm reflecting. I'm getting a sense of how am I feeling, what's going on. And that's actually pretty helpful for regulating emotions versus I have a thought or a feeling and I send it out into the internet and have someone respond to it. And I need someone to validate, to affirm, tell me I feel the same way too, or whatever it is, give me an emoji, who knows. But this performance thing by its nature and enhances anxiety. So I always encourage people, if you can, write for yourself, not for anyone else, and journal. And what's going on with you, it's always a good thing. Learning how to cultivate an authentic self, which is real and genuine and has ups and downs and good and bad days, but doesn't need someone to give me any kind of external validation. Of course, there's a whole piece about body issues, and we know that's been around for a long time. Body dysmorphia, and women especially feeling negative about their bodies, how they look. We've all worked with people who have anorexia or bulimia, all these things. And the more you're trying to get someone to like how you look in this outfit, that also can enhance anxiety. And then, of course, we talk about FOMO and people who are posting pictures of their amazing trip. They're going to Paris. So what am I doing? I'm at home hanging out. My life stinks. What do I have to offer? And that wasn't, so pronounced 30, 40 years ago. So all of these things can be factors in why there's more anxiety. It really is a larger factor, but I think there's a lot more at play than the cell phone, but I do believe digital engagement is part of it. We know that in our society, the most prevalent psychiatric problem in the US is anxiety, more than depression, more than other things. About a third of us will experience an anxiety condition during the course of our lifetime. It's a big number. And we know that when going from high school to college, kids who are anxious in high school become anxious teens when they're in college. And there is a major crunch on college campuses before the pandemic. I gave a similar talk 5 years ago about the demands being placed on college campus counseling offices. And anxiety, the need is really much higher. And so, a lot of students are getting appointments for anxiety, for depression, for stress, all these things. Suicidal attempts, like one of my students, her best friend, the first year of the pandemic, took his life here in Atlanta. That was real. And one of my best friends, his kid was having suicidal ideation and thoughts and had to go during the pandemic. This is happening very close to home for me. I don't know about you, but it's affecting both my students and my friends and their kids. And so it's a very scary thing, the idea of like losing your kid. That's one of the most terrifying. I have several of my friends who've actually talked about suicide and even attempted. And so this is a new phenomenon. It's much higher than it was when I was in high school, than when you were in high school. So it's all real. Anxiety, depression, panic attacks, these things are the big ones in terms of mental health. And impediments to academic success. Stress is increased. Anxiety has increased from 20% to 10 years ago, 25%. Having problems with sleep. Depression is up. So it's happening at a national level. And this is the Universal National College Health Assessment. They're looking at tens of thousands of students. These are big studies. So one of the things I really like, I talk about anxiety with one of my colleagues, Gary Glass, and he really helped me think about how I talk about anxiety and stress and anxiety, because for him, he's a clinical psychiatrist and he works at Emory and at the Oxford campus. And every year he talks about, like, are we pathologizing normal stressors? Are we actually creating the sense of I'm anxious versus you have a regular, I'm feeling stressed. I'm feeling stressed versus I have high anxiety. And are we pathologizing something? And we're making them feel like they have less resources by even the framing and the language that, stress is part of life versus you have high anxiety. Then you suddenly feel less capable, less competent, like something's wrong with you versus you're experiencing natural stress. So Gary's his thought is our discourse really matters when someone comes to you and, same thing with I'm so OCD. Like, actually, are you? Let's look at what that means in the DSM. You like things organized. Okay, but you're not OCD in terms of that's a clinical diagnosis. And we bandy sometimes terms around. And Gary's thing is even that language can be negative in terms of how we feel about ourselves and our abilities. So stress, it's normal. It's part of life. And honestly, we need stress. The great accomplishments of the world wouldn't happen without stress. We wouldn't rise to the occasion without stress. Without stress, we're doormats. We need some stress in life to perform, to have challenges, to grow, to live. It's part of life. But anxiety is this fear of something in the future where there's a threat, and you may not be ready to handle that threat. So anxiety is different. And having some stress, okay, then look to my resources. What can I do? What's in my control, my locus of control. But anxiety, there's somewhat of a sense of helplessness. Am I going to be able to mount the response necessary to meet that future challenge? So anxiety, you become less focused on solving the problem and managing resources, and it's more about the emotion and some feelings of helplessness. So we know this is over a 100-year-old curve, the Yerkes-Dodson curve, that you need a certain level of stress to have the best performance. If you want to perform better academically in school, in your school play, with you, whatever you're doing, there has to be a little bit of level of stress that, this matters. How I do makes a difference. Therefore, there's a little bit of stress versus I couldn't care less, which is, so the right level of stress, we call it eustress. That's the optimal level. The EU is like, euphoria. You use positive stress. And so without it, we're in trouble. And I've seen kids who had too little stress. And my thing is trying to generate, hey, this actually matters. Your grades actually matter. This stuff actually counts if there's no motivation. But if there's too much stress, I've seen students on that part of the spectrum, then it's impairing performance academically. The emotion becomes an impediment. We have to ratchet back the stress. And so having stress, if your kids come to you and say, Dad, Mom, I'm stressed, perfect. That's normal. That's part of being a student, part of being a human. There are things, if they matter, then we're going to have a degree of stress. If in terms of for writing, if you're painting, whatever you're doing, me and my wife like to solve the New York Times spelling bee. There's a little bit of stress, but very little. But if we didn't care, we just put it away. And some of that actually increases some hormones. You need a little bit of norepinephrine to focus and inhibit distraction, other things. And a little bit of cortisol is your friend. That's one of the key stress hormones, neuromodulators. You need cortisol is important. Too much is no good, but a little bit helps you focus, helps you perform better. Having some repetitive thoughts, a few of them, they're okay. And then learning how to do self-care, self-relaxation, self-calming, and still maintain high performance. So again, some stress, totally okay, but excessive fear can become maladaptive, can become destructive. You don't trust yourself, and it can impair, mood and affect. You can become unhappy, and so forth. So that when things are becoming an issue, when they're disrupting daily functioning, your experience of your body. Academically, things are starting to have challenge. Socially, it's impairing you, your health or well-being, your eating habits, sleep habits. And you know things are start getting funny if you see someone go through a dramatic change in their sleep. I've seen this among peers. I've seen it among students. When things start getting off, that's one of the key indicators that something is wrong. When their basic biological functions start getting off, there's something, because the behavior and our emotions and our feeling, it's all connected. If the behaviors start going off, like let's track back something happening emotionally. And the other thing, there's a concern about failure. There's a concern about setbacks, and this perception of, am I a failure? Am I going to be a failure? Am I a success? These kind of binary monolithic ideas on one or the other, versus no, I got a bad grade. I didn't get the part in the school play. I wasn't chosen as a peer leader, and no one liked my Instagram post, and it's okay. And I'm experiencing this setback as part of a learning, part of a growth orientation. So part of it is how you view setbacks. And do you make them, these huge things? Do you awfulize, pathologize, or is it, this is part of the process? It's not I am a failure, but I experienced a singular small f failure as part of a cycle of learning and growth on the way to successes and other things like that. So I'm experiencing this setback. So communication really matters. How we talk about it matters. Whenever, part of my training as a therapist is, you in cognitive behavioral therapy, you have to be thoughtful when someone's coming to you with dichotomous either or kind of thinking, rigid thinking. Either it's a home run or it's a failure. Either I get into this college or my life is over. Either, and we all experience, when you're a young and a high school student, there is that level of thinking, if I don't get asked out by the prom by this person, it's going to be absolutely awful. It's either or scenarios. And I've heard kids say like this, my college experience, where I go to college will determine the rest of my life. And, someone who's almost 47, like that's laughable. We have a much broader sense of all the things that are going to happen in terms of our world of work and changing careers and relationships and all these things. But ultimately, some 17-year-old kids say, my life hinges on this outcome. And being the wise elders, being parents and mentors and coaches, we can help give some feedback about some of our best friends in the world. Like they change colleges, or who are doing phenomenally well in life. They didn't get into their first choice school. And my gosh, now they're running companies, they're doing other things. But ultimately, this one thing didn't determine their life. But sometimes when you're 17, that's the way you perceive things. And we can help our students and our kids with some of our context and our wisdom, because we are a little older, we have that benefit. If they'll hear it from us, and hopefully they will in the right context. But whenever someone has dichotomous kind of thinking, good or bad, I want to help poke holes in this. And even as a tutor now, I'm a coach for executive functioning. I help students that they come and say, I'm bad at this. I'm bad at math. I'm bad at tests. I'm not good at this. I always forget. Like always, you never have done well. Like I start poking holes if they come with these broad generalizations, and I want to start to deconstruct these statements, these limiting self statements. I don't like letting anyone get by with, I'm just bad at X, or, if this happens, the world's over. It's like, really, I'll start to question and poke and dissect that. Because, again, if you don't challenge those kind of huge dichotomous beliefs, that those are anxiety inducing by their very nature. We need some gray. We need to have some nuance. And this kind of thinking in cognitive behavioral therapy, we have to add nuance onto this, because it's almost pathological having, either or kind of thinking. Like the world becomes a scary place. Albert Ellis, one of the fathers also of cognitive behavioral therapy, talked about be careful of catastrophizing. If, again, this outcome, or it's going to be absolutely awful, or awfulizing, or he said a funny masturbation. I must have this, or it's going to be, I must get this part. I must get into this class. Or it's like, it's going to be absolutely terrible. And so these are, irrational beliefs. And part of it's helping look at, was there ever a time this thing didn't happen? Is there any, can we start to deconstruct this? And that's a way to help students learn how to do themselves, because some students are prone to either or. And I have a 2-year-old, and looking at, it's either I can bring the Peppas onto the bed, or it's absolutely awful and I'm gonna have a huge fit. And it's like, it's either this outcome or awful. And so part of it, as they get older, they can handle more nuance. And as adults, we can share our stories when we didn't get this exact thing we wanted, but still things are okay. And things we learned from that, and we grew from that. And so A lot of anxiety, a lot of the stressors comes from trying to control. And it's one of those things, even looking at what happened, over the weekend, I think about the stress, and my wife, we were both upset. I couldn't read the story without having some feelings. What happened in Highland Park, and the sense of, what control do I have here? Am I in control, out of control? And when you feel out of control, you're going to have more fear and more anxiety by the nature of it. If I can't, I go in there. And so trying to hold on to control is how I can, and often, if people turn to, if I can't control this, I have an alcoholic father, let me control what I eat. Let me control this thing. If I can't, there's things in my life that are very stressful, very erratic. Let me control this. And they cling to something. That's a psychological defense mechanism. And it happens with kids too, all the time. Let me control this piece if I can't control this. And that's where sometimes OCD, other things can manifest if things feel out of control in other parts of their life. And so part of it, this is from Gary, my colleague and friend, that the opposite of control is not chaos. It's like either I control it or it's out of control. But his framing is very helpful, I believe. The opposite of control is trust, and learning and trusting. Can I make a move, however subtle or slight, away from fear and control and rigidity towards trusting and embracing and learning. Because the foundation of control comes from you're afraid of what might happen. I have to control every single bit, and then, if and only then, if I control everything, it'll work out the way. But we all know that isn't how life works. We have the benefit of experience that you can, you'll see it if you're working with kids who are going to be high school seniors. They can do everything right, control every step, and still not get into the college they want to go to. And that's part of the conversation of, we can't control, like there are things in life that are beyond our control. And can we live with some of that uncertainty and talk about probabilities? It's not the world is all a dangerous place everywhere constantly, but there are certain points and moments in time, and can I do certain things to manage risk? But still, we live in a world where there's going to be some risk. And can I find, versus let me just do every single thing and control all of it. So part of it is learning that, can we trust the future? Can we trust our ability to solve problems and challenges in the future? Versus, do I have to anticipate everything that might happen possibly? Can I learn to find a way that, I trust myself, I'm going to be able to respond. If I don't get into this college, I have resources, I have friends, I have a support system, I'm going to be able to pivot and shift. And that takes away some of the anxiety of, if I don't get this thing, God's going to be horrible, versus if I don't get this thing, I'm going to get something else. And I actually trust that I have resources. And it's learning, and this is a very self-loving thing, of learning how to trust oneself and one's resources, and to feel more resourced. That's a huge thing, like the sense of, what can I pull from versus let me control it all. Humor is a strategy I like to use when kids come and it's so, rigid, and so it's like, can I poke holes? Can I, there are, talk about gallows humor, and sometimes humor is a way, as a human strategy, to help lower stress levels and lower cortisol when we're really ratcheted up and really wound tight. Humor can be a way to bring our stress levels down and make us feel better in our bodies. Briefly, whenever I'm working with kids who have anxiety, I talk about some of the physiology, just the very, very basic stuff. I don't go into the deep hormonal changes and things, but talk about the amygdala, how it's scanning for threats. And I talk about, it's actually doing an important job. And often I tell them, I thank my amygdala because it keeps me safe. And there are times, some of you may have a very active amygdala. I know mine is pretty active. And I know I come from a line of people where there's anxiety down the line and there's, there have been some losses in my family and people, illnesses and, and so my mother has anxiety, my grandmother, deep anxiety, my great-grandmother did big anxiety. And I can go back to history and understand why there's that anxiety. And I understand that genetically, I also have some predispositions. And so when I'm driving, my amygdala will send me an image of me going off the road, hitting the wall. If I'm walking on a high place, I get an image of what if I fall off or jump off, and so my amygdala is always scanning for threats. But part of it is understanding that, okay, you're doing a job, you're trying to keep me safe, and actually like thanking it. And I appreciate that. And honestly, over millions of years, my ancestors probably stayed alive by this little organelle, which is scanning for things that are dangerous. And so it's not that I'm going to take every little image of a fearful thing of, you have a headache, is it cancer? It's like, do I have a brain tumor? It's like, thank you, bro. Probably not, but thanks so much I know you're looking out for me. And so it's doing a job. And so I talk about that. And the amygdala is there to rally our activation, to rally the autonomic nervous system. But part of it is you have the frontal cortex, which can talk to the amygdala and send hormones. One of the main ones is GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, which kind of calms down activation of the amygdala. And so the amygdala is there, sees a threat, cortisol is released, the pineal gland and then, the adrenal glands. And suddenly you have this whole response, a stress response, in terms of your heart rate and your mouth getting dry. I talk about this a lot when I'm talking about test anxiety and kids who you may feel butterflies and what's actually happening with the epinephrine, norepinephrine, all this stuff in your body, getting ready for fight or flight. But then I talk about the frontal cortex. Now, our job is, if the amygdala is activated, the alarm system, part of it is going from the midbrain to the front brain, because the frontal cortex is the part which can slow things down. That's the part of me, the amygdala says, threat, you're going really fast. And remember when you hydroplaned back in high school, which I still think about that. That was when I was 16 years old, and 30 years later, if I'm driving on a highway, I was like, I have an instant image of that, my car spun around on the highway. That's still there for me. And so it's still serving me up that reminder. But then it's like, oh, it's okay. That was 30 years ago. Your tires were, XYZ, different context, different time, different moment, different speed. And I calm myself down. And I'm able to tell the amygdala it's going to be okay. And so part of it is understanding. I'll explain to kids for having high anxiety, the frontal cortex going to the front of the brain is how we can regulate and calm ourselves down. A few things: if someone, females are more likely to experience anxiety than males, and this is actually cross-cultural. It's the same in Papua New Guinea, the same in and same in Sierra Leone, the same in Venezuela as in the U.S. It's not a U.S. phenomenon. And there's discussions about biologically why that is and so forth. Males are much more inclined to have addiction and substance abuse issues, but there's some things. And part of it, understanding if you have anxiety, is it just you, or is there, again, the culture? Looking at where do you come from, looking at your parents, looking at your siblings, looking at your grandparents, looking at the context of your life. And that'll help you understand, is it my anxiety or am I channeling that, and so forth. Additionally, parental response to failure and stressors can affect a kid's anxiety and affect a kid's self-concept. When students are struggling, when parents jump in too quickly to rescue, they don't want to see failure. It can send a message. And so part of it is learning how to let kids grapple some, struggle some. This desire, yes, we'll send you a copy of the presentation. So this impulse to swoop in and save actually is not very helpful. Also for students learning how to manage their own feelings and emotions. So parents always jump in. It's learning when to not jump in. There's a different talk, but learning when to scaffold, when to withdraw the scaffold. And part of it, if there's a failure or a setback, if parents believe and send a message that a setback, a bad grade, this is really a very, very negative thing to be avoided at all costs, that can actually create, this kid's fearing failure. And so the way you respond to a setback, being thoughtful of, this is a learning moment, this is an event to talk about, or this is a terrible thing and we have to avoid it, at all costs. And I want you to be afraid of this outcome. That's meaningful. And so when there was a mistake, a setback, what did we learn? What did we get? Okay, this time you got to stay on this thing. If you wanted an A or B, how would you do something differently? And if talking about feedback, and I get this, I'm an executive function coach, and there are times I have students who want to get all A's. I have students who are coming to me and they have F's, and looking at what happened on this paper, on this test. And there's no shame, there's no judgment, there's no, there's no high or low, but okay, let's unpack it, let's process. How'd you approach it? Okay, end up staying up late, didn't get enough help. And for the next time, how do you, but it's an inquiry-based thing. It's more about discussion. It's never a judgment or shame. And that's one of the ways I can work with them and help them to change. And they don't fear my response. And eventually, as a parent, if they're afraid of my response, I become less effective at helping them. And so there are things with anxiety. If students have anxiety, are there other issues? Sometimes kids who have learning differences have more anxiety academically in other areas. And so it's being thoughtful about that. So now I'm going to pivot for a moment. It's 8:30. Time just goes. But I'll talk about some things I use personally and other things I know about to help lower anxiety levels. One of the things I mentioned, like a journal and writing about anxiety. And we have evidence from Chicago that writing about test anxiety, helps lower and it helps increase performance, which is very helpful. Reappraising arousal, that students who learn to understand that some arousal is actually fine. And like before I take a test, before I go into a performance, my heart's beating a little faster. That's actually great. And that means there's a little bit of cortisol pumping, which, if you help them reframe, you may have a little sweaty palms, your tummy may feel a little funny. That means you have a little bit of the stress hormone, which can optimize performance. There's a great little story, Bruce Springsteen in his book Choke by Sean Baylock, that for the first couple of years when he began playing big venues, his stomach was doing backflips, and before he walked out on the stage. But then even 2 years in, it was still happening. And for a long time, he thought, oh, it means I'm afraid. But then he reframed it. Oh, it's not I'm afraid. It means I'm excited. And that was a nice little reappraisal of arousal and of there's a bit of arousal. Arousal isn't necessarily a bad thing for performance. Also, if you want to lower anxiety, shift the focus on external comparisons, how I'm doing vis-a-vis other people. And females are more aware of where they fit in the hierarchy. They're socially, in terms of their class, XYZ. They're often looking around, how am I doing vis-a-vis them? But I want to turn it back in. It's how am I doing versus how I did last semester, versus myself, versus a sibling, a parent, or other peers. Help them use their own performance as their measuring stick. Another thing, Albert Bandura, he's a giant in psychology, and he was out at Stanford doing research on self-efficacy and social cognitive theory. And his whole thing is anxiety is deeply tied to this framing of self-efficacy. Your belief in your ability to achieve an outcome will directly affect your level of anxiety. And if you believe you're not capable, not competent to handle a challenge, you have low self-efficacy in this one domain-specific area, you're going to have more anxiety. And so part of it, Bandura's whole piece is I want to increase feelings of mastery, even in small ways. And as I feel more capable, more competent, my anxiety decreases. So part of that is, can I create experiences of success for students in certain areas? They're anxious. And even, I think about this with your kids. I think about if my daughter is afraid of doing something on a big level, can I do little small steps where they experience success and they experience themselves as capable and competent, and eventually the fear goes down. And so I can't jump 10 steps and then put them in this place where they're terrified. But if I can can I create and craft and architect small successes for them, then their anxiety will decrease. It's a tool that therapists use. Even if there's a phobic reduction and someone has a fear of something, and the first thing is I don't throw them into the middle of their terror, but I start to work up, and we start first, having them close their eyes, talking about it. Then I might show them a picture of this context, afraid of heights. Then I watch a video of someone else in some social learning. Then I might do one story, then two stories, all these different things, getting you to finally, and measuring how are you doing? Can you calm yourself down? So phobic reduction, so we're building mastery as a way of lowering anxiety. Another area is a strength-based focus, which I'm a huge fan of this, is asking students, is there any other domain where you've dealt with anxiety that we can bring to this current domain? You have fear here, but is there any other area? So if someone's having problems with testing and they're afraid of testing, like how do you manage anxiety? You're a varsity lacrosse player, and someone say, well, before lacrosse, I go for a run, or I do this. Like, well, that's perfect. Let's bring this from this domain into this other domain, because you already have experience and mastery here, and let's use the strengths you already have cultivated. It's very, very helpful to find. We're doing a survey of where is their strength somewhere, because if you feel under-resourced in this domain, where are you better resourced? Can I port someone that's over, or borrow from a friend or someone else who knows? Often I do this with my students. If you're not doing well in a class, well, who is doing well in the class, and what are they doing? And have you talked to them? Have you learning, going beyond yourself to discover best practices, things like that, people you respect. And then there's something called cognitive rehearsal. I did this when I was in cross country. I had a coach Cunningham. Before the big meets, he would have us close our eyes and he would walk us through every single step of the courses, closing our eyes, imagining ourselves performing on the day of the race. Varsity athletes do this, performers do this. They imagine they're playing the concerto, eyes closed, going through, practicing themselves, doing it in a way that's calm and centered and focused. and they lay down this neural imprint. And then you want to, because the brain can't really tell the difference between imagination and actual doing. There's all this interesting research, people imagining themselves like getting stronger and flexing, then their strength actually increases, or imagine themselves on a golf course, or doing the fingering of a violin or piano, and the imagination, and they go and they're actually better physically. So the brain, when you're imagining it, actually the motor cortex things are still active when you're in your imagination. So imagination is very powerful. So cognitive rehearsal is very powerful. If you have fear of something, of imagining it, before you do it, before you get there, laying an imprint down. Also, correcting negative self-talk. Someone who says, I'm blanket, I'm bad at this. I'm bad at chemistry. I'm bad at, talking to people. I'm bad at talking to girls. I'm bad at, I'm going to start to, again, question and say, is there any area? I'm always a total klutz, right? These big negative self-statements. And can I find, like, is there any area of your life where you have some grace, some elegance? Is there any area where you don't feel clumsy? Is there any area where you can talk to a female with some level of confidence? And let's talk about that. And what are you doing differently in that context in XYZ? And what are you telling yourself? What's your self-talk? But self-talk is a big deal. And so I listen to my students if they tell me their self-limiting beliefs. And one of the keys to therapy is talking about whatever you're telling yourself in your head is going to impact what happens outside of you, as within, so without. And so anxiety is sustained by your self-dialogue, inner communication. And if there's a really strong inner critic, learning how to work with the critic, how to manage again, I have these fearful images, but I'm able to talk to them and versus being afraid of them. Okay, you're just doing your job. Thanks so much. I appreciate that. You've kept my people alive for millions of years. Thank you so much, amygdala. There's the idea of the inner coach. There's part of you that is, trying to help and supporting you all the way through. And there's a great researcher, Ethan Kross, he's in Michigan. He has a great book called Chatter, Chatter. It was published a few years ago. My mom loved it, and she has anxiety, so it was very helpful for her. And one of the things is shifting the way you talk to yourself. And if you're full of fear and anxiety of, oh God, I can't handle this, I can't do this, talk to yourself, but don't say to yourself, okay, I've got this. Shift the pronoun to Jed, you've got this. You can do this. You can, you take a deep breath. You're ready for this. So shift to the you statements, and that actually lowers anxiety. There's some kind of a separation from self. There's a cognitive distance in that messaging. And so that little shift to a you statement can help you drop anxiety, to, slow down. You've got this. You've got this. One fun psychological tool is to actually create an image. The soul, the psyche, Jung would say the soul speaks in images. And so giving a face and a name to this anxious, part of you. And you could call it Murray the Worry, or you call it some other things, or, call it some funny name. But okay, that's just you again, doing your job. Appreciate it, but, I don't need you right now. But I know that that's what you do. And in certain areas, you've kept me safe. Thanks for that. But right now, I need you to go off into some island. You can imagine this person sipping a Mai Tai on some island. But right now, your services aren't needed. But thanks for your service. And I've had kids draw a little anxiety creature. The breath is part and parcel of how we manage arousal. We now know with fMRI research, other areas, that the vagus nerve, which goes from the brain, the vagus is wandering all the way down, like to the coccyx. It's tied. It goes through the digestion. It gives feedback to the brain. And we know now that deep diaphragmatic breathing, the diaphragm is going back and forth, stimulating that vagus nerve. It's actively calming the autonomic nervous system. That slow diaphragm breathing, what it's doing, it's activating the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's slowing down your blood pressure. As the respiration changes, it's really calming. So deep diaphragmatic breathing physiologically will lower anxiety levels. It's really, really hard to be, and often when you're having anxiety, your breath gets shorter. You're often breathing your chest versus your belly. And so this is, all the yoga and qigong and tai chi, everything is about the breath for thousands of years, because it actually works and it's true. And so it's teaching students how to breathe diaphragmatically, consciously, the 4 count, and you breathe 4 in, and you hold, and you breathe out, I actually have a great book called Breath. This guy, James Nestor, wrote a book called Breath, which is very helpful if you're into that. But learning how to practice this is a way to learn self-regulation of anxiety, emotions, and feelings. Mindfulness, learning how to watch your thoughts. Oh, there's a thought going by. I don't have to get so wrapped up in that thought, and then observing your thoughts passing, observing how you're feeling your body. And then the body, exercise is one of the best ways on the planet to manage anxiety and depression and addiction, which is, when kids during the pandemic, I had students who their academic performance went to hell in a handbasket because they weren't moving their bodies. And then also their psychological health was going really negative. You have to move, and we need to move our bodies, because when we exercise and good cardiovascular activity, it releases endorphin, which is endogenous morphine, or morphine receptors, and other dopamine, the reward center of pleasure, serotonin. All these things calm us down, and they inhibit cortisol, which is the stress hormone, which is anxiety. So exercise is really powerful. And anyone suffering from clinical anxiety needs to be exercising on a regular basis and moving your body. Sleep is also insanely powerfully important for regulating our emotions and our feelings. They're being thoughtful about when you're going to bed, when you're stopping caffeine, when you're putting away the blue light and the screens. It cleans out toxins, it cleans out, the glial cells withdraw, and the cerebrospinal fluid cleans out all the junk. And if you don't wash out the junk, it's really negative, it's inflammatory, long-term and short-term. And also when you sleep is when you do memory consolidation. Things shift from, the hippocampus to the cortex, that long-term potentiation of memory. If you don't have sleep, memory transfer is a wreck. And so you're not gonna be learning. Learning happens at night while you sleep, where the hippocampus replays activation patterns again and again and again and locks them into long-term storage. We know that nature is really good for us humans. And, seeing, one of my friends told me recently that one of the reasons we love going to the water in the ocean or the mountains is because of just, the lack of a focal point. And when we're not focusing, that's calming in of itself. Seeing open, broad expanses, not short focus, is very calming for us over millions of years. Hearing the sound of a water fountain can lower anxiety. Going into the woods, even seeing nature, these things are helpful. Human connections they generate oxytocin. When you hold your kid, when you hold your partner, when you do a 20-second hug, oxytocin really pops up, and that inhibits the amygdala from being reactive to stimuli, and then drops cortisol levels. So human connection and touch. And one of the things people do when they're stressed, they put their hand on their own chest or on their arm. Even that little human touch can lower levels of cortisol. So squeezing, releasing, that's one form of relaxing. Muscle activation. One of the things, your posture does matter. If you're in a really tight posture, it's going to affect your mental state. So opening up, loosening up does affect your emotions. And then one thing I use is tapping. I was doing some earlier today, actually. And you're tapping these meridians. It's called the emotional freedom technique. You can type the word tapping. There are videos on YouTube. There's an app called the Tapping Solution. There are some free ones on that. And all it is, it's so simple. You tap this karate chop point and you say, like, this stress, this anxiety, this worry. Then you're going to tap the side of your eye. Then you tap on the eyebrow, the side of the eye, under the nose 7 times, under the chin 7 times, your collarbone 7 times, under your arm 7 times, top of your head 7 times. And honestly, every time even like right now, my body relaxes. So EFT is this amazing thing, and there's research on it, that it helps people with PTSD, it helps people from trauma, anxiety disorders, but it's so easy. I've taught my students this, very helpful. There's also a thing called havening. You can also Google havening videos. And havening is tied to the fact that there are certain afferent nerves in our body that with certain stimulation patterns, they lower levels of cortisol. And remember, if you watch mammals, if a rat pup is stimulated, the mother will lick it in a certain pattern. If your baby is stressed, you might rock it, they might pat it. And this is the exact same thing, but learning how to do it to ourselves. So havening with the face, havening is I'm doing this pattern here. And I'm thinking, like releasing my anxiety. I'm doing this pattern. My hands, I'm doing this kind of repetitive pattern. And also my arms. And you do this. So just Google havening, Google tapping. These are free. These are free things, and they're amazing. What I do, I also have an app, Heart Math. There's a book I read 20 some years ago about heart math. And what it is trying to regulate the variability of your heart rate, HRV. And so trying to get into a nice sinus wave, a nice easy pattern of your heart rate. And you think about someone, I think about my daughter, I think about someone you love, I think about some joyful memory, and I often put my hand on my chest. And I spent $100 on this little silly thing. It's a little app I put on my, which measures my heart rate, the sine wave. And if I have a irregular pattern, it shows up, my thoughts all over the place. But I try to focus my energy and my attention and to get into this nice, easy sine wave. And then afterwards, I feel so much more relaxed. So if you want a little biofeedback tool, heart math, it's a little thing. There are other ways to get biofeedback, but it's, if you measure things, you can actually see how am I doing. And I do enjoy that. There are also physical objects. There are crystals. For 20 years, I kept crystals in my pocket before my big lectures and speeches. It's a grounding thing. People do rosaries, little things. And physical touch and tactile sensation can help. I also, there's the pyramid. I like the image of the pyramid. And whenever things are really crazy in my life, or there's real stress, or there's a real accident, I imagine like a pyramid, like some kind of sacred geometry, the shape, the strength of the pyramid. And there's wind all around it and storm and rain, but the pyramid is solid. And I imagine I have that strength. So I use imagery. Jung, if you like, he's a great psychologist. There are images we can evoke, and some people, they can be religious in terms of, like imagining a spiritual figure, the Buddha or Jesus, or there's Robert Moore talked about the king, like imagining right now I need my king or my queen. I need someone really solid, and I evoke the image. And it's similar to the idea of the inner coach, and that everyone has, this stronger part of myself. Can I tap into that now? Can I evoke that piece of me when I'm really stressed and scared? Is there a wiser, stronger part of me? Jung talked about the young part of ourselves is called the puer, like pure, the child, and the old part, the wise part, is called the senex. And even someone at 15 has a very young child part and a very old wise part, which shifts with time. But can I activate and call in the power of this wise, deep part of myself? If I'm feeling small, my little s self feels very small. Is there a bigger part I can evoke? All right. I took a little longer, but that's okay. Motivation, it's all connected. I mean, managing oneself, managing one's feelings, it's all tied to this. So motivation, my favorite theory of motivation, two researchers, Maryland, up in New York, upstate New York, Ryan and Deci, they talked about, I think Rochester, this theory of self-determination, that if I'm trying to motivate people, and I do it for a living with my students, I want to give them feelings of competence that they can, again, this anxiety piece, like, do I feel I'm capable, competent, self-efficacy? Then autonomy. All humans need to feel like they have some freedom, some autonomy, some choice. I see it with my 2-year-old daughter. You see it with an employee. You see it with, we all need some choice. And when choice goes away, that lowers motivation. And in terms, even the smallest choice can be motivating for kids. And then all of us need to feel related and not isolated and disconnected. That our motivation, our learning, our growth, all learning is social. All, we need to feel connected to others. And this is important for health. And so knowing this, if I'm trying to motivate someone, I want to use positive feedback. I'm showing them I'm connected with you. I'm noticing you psychologically, like, excellent work there. I try to avoid controlling language. You should, you have to, you must. Fear-based controlling language. I want to help them feel, and if they demonstrate some competence and mastery, I want to attend to that and notice that and draw attention to, like, wow, you really knocked out that thing. I'm very impressed, very happy. You're really growing in this area. And in choice, autonomy, and then the connection. These are all things I try to use whenever I want to motivate someone. I mentioned that one already. Now, there's also, there's the challenge we all face as parents, as coaches, that, how much do I help? How much do I let someone struggle? And there's always a balance point. Because I want to build a competent adult, and the struggle is actually important for them to build inner resources. And I want to support someone, but I don't want to swoop in and rescue. And it's okay if they have some frustration and some disappointment, even as a means of learning what I have to do different the next time. I try not to deprive people of there's the framing of the gift of frustration. There has to be, with my daughter, it's like I can go in there and fix the little thing she's working on, Let me actually let her work it through. And the same thing will be, age appropriate for when your kid's 15, or they're, are they going to turn in their thing for the scholarship? Do I go in and rescue them, or do I let them have that setback of they didn't turn in and miss the deadline, they live with the consequences? And I think I tend to err on giving them the gift of the frustration, because my ultimate goal is building a competent 25-year-old. And even if they have a setback and they feel some pain at 15 or at 18, or they're going to learn from this, and that'll help them avoid a more expensive failure in 3 years, in 2 years, and so forth. So allowing the breakthrough moments, allowing them to get it, not taking that from them, letting them, experience and see that, motivating them. And if I have to, provide a scaffold, I try to provide a minimal scaffold. I'm going to show them, because some kids do need, they have no idea. Then I'm trying to help them learn something, but I'm going to provide the minimal scaffold and then withdraw it as soon as I can. So I'm not creating a sense of dependence. Goal setting is important for students, and we know that for motivation, the short-term goals and achieving them are much more impactful for motivation levels than long-term dispo goals. And I want to set something for this week, next week, and then as we get there, we're making progress. One thing that's interesting, like a lot of my students I work with for EF coaching, like they like doing lists and crossing off the list. And I like doing my things are digital, but I have students still who love to physically cross off, I did something, and they're getting feedback. I accomplished this, and that's motivating, that's reinforcing when I see that I'm actually achieving something toward this end. And students who are verbally encouraged set their own goals, then they attain them, experience more confidence, more self-confidence, and then commitment to those goals. So I never want to come on high and tell the students, this is the outcome. I want to collaborate with them, but when students set their own goals and you are a partner in this process and this conversation, that is always better for the kids. And then self-talk, motivation levels, be careful again if they come with you with overgeneralization, black and white thinking. I try to always poke holes and help them recalibrate. And if someone says, oh, I'm just terrible at this, or I'm not good at this, and I'm trying to work with them, I try to help them correct and calibrate, because it's not, versus, being very specific, because I want them to trust me and believe me. And so I have to be very accurate with helping them understand where things are. We talked about being thoughtful about not dwelling so much on external comparisons, and having it more compared to yourself, how you're doing versus past performance and so forth. And one thing as parents is expectations that you have for your kids, they do matter. As a coach for me too. And there was some interesting research, David Yeager, Jeff Cohen, talked about this they did a small research study of they had 2 cohorts of kids in Psych 101, and they gave them, they were college kids, freshmen in college. And so there are 2 groups. One class, they graded their papers for, they had to read an assignment. And the students had the ability to redo the paper for a higher letter grade if they wanted to. And for the control group, one cohort, all they wrote, they gave them all the feedback, XYZ things you got wrong. And they said, I'm giving you the comments, so you'll have feedback on your paper. And then off you go, do what you do. The other group, this is the experimental condition, they said, I'm giving you these comments because there's the only difference was I have very high expectations and I know you can achieve them. And then off they go. That was the one difference. And now it's amazing, the group who got I'm giving you feedback, 4 out of 10 of them went back and read their essays. But the higher expectations group, 8 out of 10 of them went back and revised them. So you doubled the effect size, which is incredible, from the intervention of a little sentence. And so part of it, this is again a balance point but if kids know that you care about them, that you believe in them, that they can accomplish things, it affects behavior and performance. But one thing I want to throw out there in terms of motivation, there is a framing of this that kids do well if they can. And that's something I do believe there's some validity in that. There's the kids who are not thriving. There's something that's getting in the way of their success. And if in part of it, what may be perceived as a lack of motivation, underlying that, in many cases, there is a lack of a skill, lack of and there could be a frustration after a series of trying and failing. Then that kind of, you have feelings of frustration, and you're like, my efforts aren't generating the outcome I want, therefore I'm not going to try. And then it becomes, therefore I don't care. And so often when I hear someone saying, I I hate math, or math is stupid. Whenever someone tells me this thing is stupid, then I know they've experienced some frustration, and then they've checked out. So part of it is if I can give that kid some success, if I can create some positive, oh, my behaviors lead to the outcomes I want, then suddenly this thing isn't so stupid anymore. And so very, very often it's their skills they're lacking. Let's work on studying. Let's work on other things. When I see that they're frustrated in their efforts. So that's the whole thing of these kids aren't motivated. No, they're lacking in certain skills which we can teach. And often it's in skills of organization. That's part of my work as an EF coach, with helping them with prioritizing, planning, getting help, resources. When do you study? How? And then suddenly they become motivated when they actually learn skills. And the other thing is, when it comes to motivation levels and working with young people, I want to find out what motivates them. It doesn't matter to me what the parents want per se, because ultimately that's not going to drive performance and behavior. And it's not going to be durable, because once the parents are out of the picture, when the kids are in college, whatever the parents want doesn't matter. Now the kids are doing their own thing. And I'm always focused on building competent adults. So I want to talk to them about what they care about, what their goals are. And even if the parents want X, like what do you want? And what does success look like for you? And what does it mean? And not everyone's the same. You have three kids in your family. You have two total rock star overachievers, but this other kid has different goals, doesn't want to compete in the same level, doesn't want to, that's a take a niche. The high performers, I'm not going to be my sister, therefore I'm not going to even try. But here's what I care about. And I want to try to figure out their currency and what motivates them and what are they interested in. And can I tie whatever thing we're looking at to what they want? And if a student eventually wants to, have a certain career, and they want to have these certain choices, I may be able to tie, well, this outcome here and this little test you're doing, or this class and this grade may in fact help you achieve the goals you actually want. So when I want to motivate someone, I don't care about my motivations. I don't care about the parents. I figure out what do you care about, and is there a way to connect this behavior activity to what you care about? Because if I can understand their motivational currency, then I can motivate them. But I have to really understand what they want first. And so forget what you know, talk to them and listen to them and find out, and also I tend to really not use control or punishment, or shame to motivate. Those things, there's a real price to those. I try to use, again, validation, positive reinforcement, staying positive. And reinforcement matters, and noticing, I'm noticing you, I'm shining my light, my attention, I'm validating, I'm affirming when there's a success, and even a small success, I'm going to attend to it and celebrate it, versus using other things, threats, punishments, those kind of things. And the way you want to praise students is going to be more process-based, more informational feedback. You have to be careful. We've learned from Carol Dweck, her work at Stanford, be careful about telling kids they're a genius or they're so brilliant, because then when they have a setback, they may think they're an imposter or a fraud, or maybe I'm not so brilliant. And so you always want to reward and celebrate their effort and their creativity and their problem solving versus, gosh, you're just so smart. And I have to be careful as a parent. I think my kids, very, very talented, but part of it even telling, two, I'm not saying, gosh, you're so smart, Juliet. But, you worked really hard, and the way you solved that, the way you match those things, for a 2-year-old, then eventually for a 10-year-old, and eventually for a 20-year-old, and then eventually for an employee who works for you, kind of praise and so forth. So there's more things. Let me just go through. We do academic tutoring, test preparation, and coaching for executive functioning. We have this great thing happening July 30th and 31st. We do have a national practice test weekend where we're going to give probably several thousand tests. If your kids are practicing the SAT or the ACT, they can work with us and have a free option. Those will be free. And we'll also have sessions for strategy. That's a big thing we do every year in July. We're having 3 more seminars. We have teens and technology. I will talk more about phones and boundaries in late July. And teens and friends, social emotional learning, talking about the importance of that, how it all fits together. And then teens and anxiety will be, there'll be a good part of this talk I'll be repeating, but also focusing more on anxiety. And if somebody missed any of these, those will be available over the next 2 months. And we also have a great a writing workshop that we're doing for students who may have anxiety about their writing skills. We're doing a comprehensive writing work. We have a whole new curriculum that we've just recently printed and published, and should be very, very helpful. We're excited about it. It's many, many years in the making to get to this new curriculum. All right, so we now have some time to go through questions that I maybe haven't answered. So why don't we open it up and let's go from there. All right, so go ahead and take a minute, and I'm happy to field any questions about anxiety, about motivation levels. And if there aren't questions, that's okay too. Great information. Do you provide executive functioning for kids post high school graduation? Absolutely. 3 of my students right now, one of them is going to Michigan in the fall. Another of my students, he's at Texas A&M. I have another student at Northeastern, without question. Because often, kids going to college is a whole different world, and the amount of space and the amount of time. Some kids thrive. One of my students at A&M, he was on academic probation. He failed 2 classes, and there was so much space that it was hard to regulate and manage and how to structure time. So yeah, we work with a lot of kids in that transit, because executive functioning, the key windows are from like 8th to 9th grade is a big transition. Going from sophomore to junior year to all the APs, that's a big jump. And then going from high school to college. Those are often the points when kids may need to beef up their organization, prioritization, their resource, help seeking, structuring, planning. So those are often it, but definitely a lot of our students we see going from that high school to college, or they begin struggling in the middle of junior year. And then we work. So yes, the answer is definitely yes. Thank you, that was great. Thank you so much. I'm glad it was helpful. How can I manage my own anxiety if it is myself that places these expectations? Right. And parents, it's interesting. Our kids, they can often channel our feelings. Kids are like copper. They can channel our emotions until they really develop their own sense of self. They get stronger and stronger. So if we're nervous, and your kids are looking to us, your kids look to you to how should I respond to this? And if you have anxiety, even if you don't speak it, but you have it, your kids can sometimes even sense it by, what percent of communication is nonverbal? A lot of it, maybe 20% of it is actual the syntax, the language, then the context, the body, how we respond, our eyes, it tells a ton. So when we manage our own fear and anxiety, it's a gift to our kids. And so part of it, the same techniques that I spelled out in terms of looking at your own dichotomous beliefs and thoughts about this has to, if my kid gets a B, we're not going to, or if my kid doesn't get into this college, or it's like, though you have to learn how to regulate that for yourself. And that's going to be breathing. That's going to be talking with your spouse, exercising, all the things, but ultimately looking at the beliefs you have, because your kid's going to go on their own path. And it may be, if you were, I was my high school valedictorian, I have a PhD, my kids may not be academically inclined, and understanding that, they're not ego projections of me, like they're going to be who they are. And there's such incredible variation in genetics of your offspring. I look at my brother has 6 kids. And when you have more kids, you can see more of the diversity. And even siblings, direct siblings can have 68% of their DNA the same, or only 30-some%. There's a huge variation. And his oldest son is super academic, total powerhouse, rigid, focused. Then the third one is not the academic kid. And so part of it is not bringing the same expectations. Your kids are going to be who they are. And they may not go to the college you went to, your alma mater. My kids may not go to the same high school, same colleges, but letting them have their path, their journey for who they are, and learning, it's a self-loving thing, letting your kids be themselves and not having the control. Because again, fear of the future begets control, but that also is going to strain the relationship you have with your kid, versus coming with love and support and being there for them no matter what. And we can work through whatever happens. And so that can, when you get a hold of your own fear and anxiety, it opens up a new pathway in that relationship you have with your kid, once you manage your own fears. So yeah, as parents, when we regulate ourselves, our feelings, it's a gift to our kids. There are other programs, there are other things, there are other I was very, very deeply involved with a therapeutic nonprofit called the Star Foundation. I was the president for years, and they do retreats. There are retreats for managing anxiety and things like that. So, but yeah, definitely getting a hold of yourself is an absolute gift to your kids and to your own mental health. Now, what happens if you don't have the motivation to study and end up procrastinating, and then you get anxiety last minute? How can you prevent this? Well, if you know, part of it is understanding your pattern and understanding, do you put this off? I was talking to a student today, the one going to Michigan in the fall, and how, you know, she's a STEM kid, and she's interested in neuroscience and neurobiology, but history, English, she puts them off to the very end, and that's often the thing that cause stress, because those are her lower interest level things. And then, so that relative lack of interest compared to STEM leads to lower motivation, procrastination. Then there's more stress and anxiety up till 2 a.m. And so part of it is understanding like the pattern you have, understanding how you work. And some people, they self-handicap and they like don't start till late. Then they use the adrenaline and the dopamine and everything, you know, to focus. Because when you have high cortisol, high stress, then you can like focus for a while and have a distraction. But part of it is, you know, procrastination is knowing your pattern. And part of it could be you structure it differently. And if you know that you have the hard thing, don't save it for the end. And even before you do the thing you like, you know, eat the frog first, do the hard thing first, and then do things you like later. And it could be, you know, you minimize distractions. I have limits on my phone. I have limits on my computer. I use like stay focused. There are other things where after 15 minutes on Reuters, it says, shouldn't you be working? And it kicks me out. It could be if I'm trying to study or focus, I dock my phone. A lot of my students I work with for EF coaching, they don't study or work or write with their phones in their room. They put them in the kitchen, or they lock down certain apps. They lock down Snapchat, they lock down TikTok during certain windows using their screen time app on their iPhones. And so just knowing yourself and knowing how you work. And if you've had the same habit, like, let me do something different. Let me change it. And most often it's, you know, keeping the distractions out of your workspace and doing the hard thing first. What do you do when one parent has a very supportive parenting style and the other has a threat, shame, comparison style? There's room for some work in the marriage for discussion, because part of it you want to have as best as can a unified front. And I think that, you know, a candid discussion, because if someone, and we all, you know, we've all used negativity. We all have an inner critic. There are times we shame ourselves and use fear to get us to do things. And there are times, you know, it does work, but there's a real price, and there's a price to that relationship. And ultimately you're going to see the child gravitating typically toward the more positive, affirming, nurturing parent, and away from the shame and judgment. You know, unless there is this sense of, I need to impress you, I need your validation. You're the one you're the withholding parent, and therefore I have to earn your affection. And that becomes a whole other bunch of chaos. And that student, like they're going to have things to work through when they get older, if they have the sense of, I have to earn your affection and your approval, in terms of their own self-concept and their behaviors and their negative things they go to when they develop a self-style of shame and judgment, and their own inner critic will grow. If there's a really strong external critic, they'll internalize that. So part of it is just, you know, the discussion and trying to be on the same page, working it through, because you can't look to the kid or explain, dad does this, but no, you want to keep the kid out. But if that really is the dyad, you have to be working together. And that's part of marriage. Marriage can be hard. We have different styles. And, you know, we often fight about how we parent, how we work, what we expect from the students. But I think the more we work together as husband and wife, or as partners, as a team, it's going to be better for our kids. And they're going to be, you know, I guess more internally at peace if they see that we are unified in how we approach things. How many sessions are suggested for the executive functioning for high school senior, especially with all the competing priorities for the year? I mean, here's the thing. Executive functioning coaching, we call it the hidden curriculum, because if you get this right, if kids get better at this, it makes everything easier and everything better. It makes that physics easier. It makes the AP Econ easier. It makes your BC calculus. If you get better at prioritizing, at strategizing, at resource seeking, at time management. So my thing is, it's, you know, I think about that Stephen Covey, or sharpening the saw. If I can sharpen my saw, then every tree I cut will be much, much, much faster. So it's putting in that half an hour, you know, every week or so, it saves me 3 hours. in terms of when I'm studying, how I'm studying. So to me, you gain efficiency, you gain speed and time. So anytime you get better at executive functioning, my sense is you're making improvements, and also they're durable, and also they generalize way beyond high school. They're going to generalize to college, and they're going to go into their internships and their work. They learn how to manage time, how to plan better, how to get support and get resources and so forth. So I think it's worth getting that support if there's a lack there, for sure. Thank you. Great information. Who can I reach to in Atlanta for getting an assessment done for my son? He needs strategy and motivational coaching as well as test prep. I would say reach out to, Applerouth does these things. So info at Applerouth, we are, I think, a very good resource here in Atlanta for helping. We could, walk through and do assessment for your son. Good evening. I'm in high school and often I feel overwhelmed, stressed. I understand that some of my stress is just normal, but it's been growing for a while now. I try to breathe. I think through my emotions, but then I become even more overwhelmed. My question to you is, how do I let the stress not overtake me, but exist without me fighting myself? And I think you have a lot of awareness and insight, which is, I think, amazing. And part of it, our ability to regulate our emotions, one thing that's interesting is this axis, the frontal cortex to the amygdala, keeps getting more deeply wired with age. So the same as my 2-year-old can't really manage her emotions as we hold her and then we help calm her down. And at 15, you're one level, at 18, but we still keep developing the ability to regulate our emotions until we're in our early 30s, which is amazing. And so for one, know that it's going to keep getting better just as your brain keeps developing. Our brains aren't fully developed until we're cognitively mid-20s and emotional regulation early 30s. So part of it is, so you tried some breathing and you tried thinking it through, those didn't work, but there's a lot more things we can work on and try. And part of it is, being gentle and nurturing and loving to yourself. And one thing I would say is try writing. Let's try some other interventions. Let's try the doing some journaling and writing about how stress shows up for you. What do you notice in your body? I would say let's do some other things. Have you tried some exercise? Have you tried? And then sometimes, talking to someone, someone who is a trusting, person who has some experience. If there's someone who you really cares about you, it could be a teacher, it could be a mentor, it could be a parent, it could be a friend, but someone who has a little more experience managing the feelings and emotions. And part of it is be careful. So in high school, some people go to negative things. They try to numb out the feelings, or self-harm, or substance abuse, or other things to distract themselves. But that's not really great. I mean, it's better to learn self-regulation skills now. And also, there are different things. We mentioned you tried breathing. There are different approaches to that. How to manage breathing, different counts. There's also, I really like yoga, like using your body, going out in nature. So there are many, go back through some of the slides and see if you can practice some other areas, but definitely keep trying. What works for someone may not work for someone else, but there are many ways. And what I want to have is, like, if there are 20 strategies, these 3 might work for me. But the 3 that work for me may be very different than the 3 that works for my parents, my sister, XYZ. Okay. That's great. Thanks so much. Anytime. So we have a commercial construction company that's 25 years old. My husband began with savings and a lot of faith prior to us getting married. How can I get him to fully understand that trying to convince our 17-year-old daughter to major in engineering, which she isn't interested in, is causing anxiety? I believe she should major in what interests her, like we did. How do I get my husband to understand? Yeah, trying to force, because part of it, again, if you look up Deci and Ryan, look up self-determination theory of motivation. If you're trying to motivate someone with control or coercion or force, I mean, there is an innate basic need for autonomy and choice. And if the choice is not there, motivation levels are going to flag. And ultimately, if they're doing a STEM degree, an engineering degree, and she hates engineering, it's not going to end well. And it could be, there's going to be a fracture. It could be, and there's so many kids change majors because they're trying to please a parent, or they think they should be this, they should be pre-health, they should be pre-XYZ, and they get into the class and realize, I don't like this. It's hard to keep going for 4 years, and especially knowing this is going to be a career. So there's a good chance if your husband pushes this thing through, he's going to end up paying a lot more for college, because so many kids don't finish in 4 years. I work with students who change majors, and then all those classes don't transfer, and they have to take a 5th year. It happens all the time. Or they change schools. And so my thing is, from an economics perspective, which it can be motivating to someone who owns a company, this is a bad economics move, trying to push and major on a student. And there's a good chance this will flame out. And there are many other ways. And part of it is underlying him. What is the source? Is it he wants her to be an engineer, or he wants her to be a success? And talking about what that means for your husband, what success means. He has his success in terms of he has some autonomy, he's an entrepreneur, but what do you really want for your daughter? Do you want her to be an entrepreneur? Do you want, so having the deep conversation. Right now we're focusing on engineering, so that was his path, but underlying, like 3 levels down, like, ask the why engineering. If you ask them the 3 levels of why, you'll get to, well, I want her to be, or I'm scared she won't do, whatever. Find out what this underlying, it was his fear of her not doing well, his fear of her not having the same lifestyle. Ask 3 levels of why do you want this, honey? Why do you want, why do you want that? Or why do you want that? And you'll find a much deeper level. Oh, if he wants her to run the business, well, that's a whole different thing in terms of, does she want to run it? And if she doesn't want to run the business, it's not going to work. And she might either run it into the ground, or she'll do it for a year or two. And part of it, at the end of the day, that may be an ego thing. I made this, or it may be better for him when he retires to sell the business or sell it to his employees or do an exit. There are many ways to exit without giving it to your kids. And not everyone's made. My dad wanted me to go to medicine. I spent one summer, I interned with my father in his practice. I'm like, Dad, there's no way in hell. This makes me nuts. I would be miserable at this. I need more variety. I watched him do the same thing, and he loved the patients, he loved the relationships. I need more, I need different challenges. And so my dad honored that. But ultimately, you want your kids to be happy and successful and healthy and love their work. And the way he loves his work, giving her the gift of letting her love her work and letting her find the path to happiness. And people who are happy in their work tend to be more economically better compensated. People who are good at what they do tend to like what they do. In many cases, tend to be the ones who they enjoy their work. So if you don't like what you're doing, even if there's money, there are going to be other negative outcomes, and other costs to that too. So my thing is focus on a work you can, career you can do. And also, so many kids are going to change careers like 10 times. And so the idea that, he started a company and stayed for a quarter century, most kids in this generation are not going to do that. Many of them are going to have 5, 6, 7, 8 careers. So even if he comes and runs the company for 3, 4 years, most kids don't stay. They're going to want other challenges, especially these kids, born in the 2000s and beyond. Okay. All right. It seems like boys today deal with stress by saying, why bother to try too hard? It's similar to what you mentioned about how some kids are too calm. How do you find what motivates a person taking this approach? And so, yeah, when the kids don't, they say, why bother? I try to get what do you care about and what are you interested in? Sometimes there are kids who go to, they spend a weekend with a sibling at a part of school and they're like, oh my God, that was the most amazing weekend of my life. So much fun, the parties, the sports. And then, well, if you want that, we have to put forth some energy and effort to end up getting you to that place. And so I'm trying to tap into what they care about and what is their motivational currency. And it could be they've decoupled this academic challenge from what they want. And the question is, can I find a way to unite those, tie those together? But it could be that some kids are not going to be as academically, can I give them choices in their classes? Can I give them can I make it more compelling, more intrinsically motivating, where there's some pleasure in them for the, if I'm making them do classes they hate, there's less pleasure. Typically in my experience, when there's more pleasure, there's more intrinsic motivation, kids tend to do better and try harder. So trying to give them some choice, some autonomy, trying to talk about what they value, their long-term, what they want to do, if they have any idea about that. There are people they admire, what choices they want to keep open for themselves. But it could be also they're just not going to be academically a powerhouse, but still, is there a path where they can have some confidence in their abilities? But I can't always turn someone who that doesn't care about school into a total school rock star, but I want to find, is there a better version of this self? You may not be like your sister and get all A's and be in all AP classes, but is there a version of you that's going to feel better about yourself and enjoy and take classes you enjoy and feel more confident and competent? Because often kids don't like if they're failing or struggling, or if the parents are on them, or if they're losing privileges, they don't like that. I'm trying to get them more of what they want, which may be more freedom, more autonomy. And in some cases, the path to more freedom is getting B's, not C's. And then you've earned the right in your household to having more space, more freedom, the cell phone you want, whatever it is. But I'm trying to get them more of what they want. And some kids come to me and say, I hate the chaos. Like I get so far behind, I struggle, it's stressful. I don't want that. I'm like, well, can we lower that level of stress? Can we do certain things in a certain way, put in place certain restrictions, how we do, how we approach our work? And then there's less stress. Then you're getting B's, not C's. And would that be better for you? Would that feel better? That you're always worried about, what if I fail? And you don't want to fail. You're nervous about that because then, there could be consequences. But what if we get you up into the B range, and then there's just less stress and you can play more, talk to your friends more, hang out more? So I'm trying to find out what motivates them, what their currency is, how do I get you there? Versus trying to tell them math is amazing. I really never say that. But I try to figure out how do I get you more of what you want in your life for yourself? And if it so happens you love math, great. If you don't, it's okay. But still, keeping you out of the low C range can make your life better for these reasons. Okay. All right. I think we have our last question. Thank you for your great advice. How do you balance putting pressure on the child versus motivating them? It's hard to know when to push and when to let go. I tend to do less pushing. I tend to talk about, again, what they want, what outcomes they're looking for. And I try to use a pull more than a push. Can I create a sense of, hey, this may actually affect you? And if kids understand how this might benefit them or benefit somebody else or actually help them in some capacity, then there's going to be some more motivation versus they're afraid of me or trying to, appease me. Can I find out, again, what they want for themselves? And can I tie that? That's one of my primary go-to techniques. I've seen parents pay for grades. I've seen them use motivation tech. I tend to dislike the tangible rewards and try to use more of the feedback. And if they get a positive outcome, I'm going to shine light on them. I really noticed, that paper, that was really creative. And I give them that kind of validation affirmation, which feels good because we all want to be connected. We all want to have some light shined upon us. And so if they realize, wow, I'm getting some strokes here, some positive feedback versus shame, criticism, XYZ, most humans tend to go towards the positive. They tend to have a positive orientation. And if I don't want to praise, like, you got an A, awesome, but looking at, wow, you really worked hard, you were creative, you got this, praising, giving feedback on their process. And that was really impressive. Like, you started really early, you thought that one through, you got the right kind of help. That's fabulous. That's going to serve you well in life. And then, so them being seen and that mirroring transference, they're being validated. You tend to get more of those behaviors if you do that kind of positive, that kind of feedback. So me, I'm a big feedback guy. I'm less of a pressure guy. I'm more of a, reward, the intangible, like the verbal feedback. We call it a verbal reward. That's more my angle. All right, y'all. I think that's all for tonight, 9:23. Thank you all so much for being here, being part of this. We'll share with you the slides and we'll a copy of the presentation. And please feel free to share this. If you need any help at all with your students, give us a call. We're here to help. All right, y'all. Have a good night. Take care.